Hello, everyone. It's a long way from there to here, but it's been a long way for all of us from where we were a few years ago to where we are now. And I listened to Bev beginning to talk, and I heard the tremor in her voice momentarily, and I thought, that's the right response to this. You know, when I came in here tonight. When I came in here tonight with Trudy, and it's overwhelming, the emotion that's in this togetherness. And I think I'm reminded of it every time I'm in a room full of people in real time, because this that we're all sharing now by being together is what it truly is to conspire, which is to say to breathe together. That's conspiring. And you can feel it. You know, you have a physiological response to the togetherness, and not least the heat. You know, you don't feel the heat of all these living, breathing, respiring bodies on a video call or a Zoom call. And more and more every day, I think this is what we have to, in many ways, not only, but we have to remember to get back to this. You know, the power of literal physical togetherness, because it's by literally being together in this way that we will win. And we will win, you know, as sure as... You know, day must follow night. And in the darkness, you know, a single flame struck in the darkness has its greatest impact. You know, that's when a single flame really matters, is when it's struck in the darkness. And everything that's being done, everything that's being foisted upon us, that's being attempted by the authoritarians and the totalitarians, it's an inversion of the natural order. And it's for that reason that it will come to an end and it will fail. And what we all, you know, imperfect human beings that we all are, represent is that sense. We know right from wrong. That's really what made us do the things that we've all done individually and collectively over the last few years. It's been driven by we simply knew what was happening was wrong. And everyone knows the difference between right and wrong. And you can ignore it and you can set it aside, or you can respond to it. And I've spoken, Bev said, you know, I've spoken over and over again about the freedom to speak. And I reach all the time for the right words to express how important speech is. And in the title that Alan suggested to me about talking tonight, you know, the word there was reflecting. You know, reflecting on how we got to where we are now. And as someone that, you know, 1,000 years ago, you know, I was an archaeologist, and I contemplated the way that people did things thousands and hundreds of thousands of years ago, and I constantly reflect on that in search of answers to the predicament in which we find ourselves. And I think it's actually worth remembering that while our species, Homo sapiens, it's maybe 250, 300,000 years old, that's how long we've been here, but we've only been speaking for a very brief period of time in the scheme of things. There's very few reasons to think that we've been speaking really for much more than 10 or 15,000 years, which is an extraordinary thing when you think about it, because everything that's been achieved, everything's speeded up, and all of the things that we were capable of, we were able to manifest and make real once we were able to talk to one another. It was speaking together, conspiring and sharing ideas and debating and arguing and coming to conclusions and deciding on the way forward. That's what's enabled everything. But it's been such a recent development. And I find it so painfully ironic that now, after the Enlightenment and after the Age of Reason and all of the rest of it, that the would-be authoritarians are actually trying to stop people talking. They're literally trying to silence people. To what end? Because everything that we've done, everything creative, everything meaningful, we've been able to achieve because we've been able to share thoughts together and argue and debate and share ideas and come to agreement and all of the rest of it. And sometimes when I think about where we are now, I have conversations online and offline and in private. Where some of us, we contemplate the possibility of having to start again. Because I for one, Alan gestured towards Westminster and the characters in that clown show. And I thought, to me, I find them to be illegitimate. And I do mean bastards. I find all I can hope to do is to disregard them, because I think that we have to set them aside. In at least in the short term, they have to be disregarded and set aside because they are the problem. And I think about the necessity to establish new communities, and I think about the necessity that there might be to think again about education. From primary school, nursery school, primary school, and all the way up, because that's a captured entity, as are all of the entities upon which most of us were raised to believe were there with our best interests at heart. And I think about how impossible that sounds. How do you cope with nothing? How do you contemplate going back to nothing and starting again? And when I think about that, I think, well, first of all, I think about Cool Hand Luke. And I think about when he wins the card game with a handful of nothing. And the George Kennedy character, Dragline, says, he beat you mullet heads with a handful of nothing. And Paul Newman says, sometimes nothing can be a real cool hand, hence Cool Hand Luke. Because sometimes it's your attitude in the face of having nothing. It's the way that you present with that. And I thought I would draw to a close really with an anecdote that's it's been around since the 1950s. Now, Justin Trudeau's face was up there on that big screen repeatedly, and Canada, obviously, we've all looked on with grief really at what has happened to Canada in the last few years. But there have been times in the past where Canada has been in a dark place. Before, not as dark as now, but in the 1950s, there was an attempt finally to get the last of the indigenous people that we used to call Eskimo into the reservations, to collect them all and get them all away get them all out of the wilderness and get them all gathered together somewhere. And there's a story, a legend, a myth, a folklore about a grandfather who was refusing to cooperate. And he was saying that there was no way that he was going to submit. There was no way that he was going to give in to the authorities. And his family, his extended family, in hopes of persuading him otherwise, they took everything from him. They took his axe, and they took his fishing lines, and they took his snowshoes. They took all of the paraphernalia that he used to survive in the wilderness, and he thought that if they did this, surely grandfather would now accept defeat and go into the reservation and live like that. But what grandfather did was he crawled out of the igloo under cover of darkness into the winter night, and he dropped his sealskin trousers, and he defecated into his own hand. And as the feces began to freeze, he molded it into a knife. And once he had a knife shape, once it was solid, with his own saliva, he put an edge onto the shit knife so that it would cut. And with the shit knife, he butchered a husky, and from its carcass, he manufactured a rudimentary sled for one person. And he also used some of its hide for a harness, and he harnessed up a couple of the other sled dogs. He tucked the shit belt into his knife, and he took off into the darkness. Because rather than contemplate what the authorities wanted him to do, he was prepared to set off into the winter with less than nothing. You know, how could you possibly illustrate the determination to get on with life with nothing but being ready to make a knife out of your own feces? And I think about the indomitability of the human spirit that is made manifest in a thought like that. And I think, finally, everything that we care about, the community, the nation, Britain, whatever it is that you care about in this context, Britain doesn't really exist, not in any practical sense. It's just an idea, or it might better be described as a dream that's shared by sufficient people at the same time to make it a collective entity that we all understand. And it means that I sometimes, I've used the phrase before that I think Britain at the moment is subject to a controlled demolition project. You know, Britain has been being taken apart, you know, by those that would asset strip it and replace it with something else. But the point is that what we love and what we care about, we make it together because we hold Britain, we hold the community, we hold all of these things in our hearts. That's the only place that these things actually are real and reside. And it's in a room like this, a hot room like this, and the heat is the energy of people. And it's the energy of people conspiring and breathing together. And so while I am naturally, to be quite honest with you, a glass is half empty kind of a guy, I use that to remind myself of the necessity to have faith, whatever the word faith means to you. I force myself to have faith. I force myself to contemplate that our freedom is inalienable, which is to say it's not given to you by any person, and for that reason it can't be taken from you by any person. And most important of all, you can't give it up. Because it's inalienable, it's when someone comes to you and says, I want to take your freedom from you, I want to enslave you, even if it seems like the soft option to submit to that, you can't, because your freedom is your inalienable right, which is to say, it's at that moment that you have to stand and say, you're going to have to tear my freedom from me like my beating heart, because I can't give you it. You'll have to take it from me with life itself. And so, when I heard Beverly talking, and her voice broke a little bit with emotion, and when she was speaking about, in advance of me coming up here, I felt a lump in my own throat. And I say again, that's the right response, because I think it comes from a place of love. It's about love, about all of the things that are important. And all of the things that are important are here in this room tonight because we're together, and everything will be all right.